The sun was barely cresting over the dense Virginia pines as Lieutenant Sarah Coleman stepped onto the gravel path leading to Camp Valor. The cold morning air carried a sharp scent of pine, mixed with diesel and the faint tang of gunpowder lingering from the previous day's training exercises. She adjusted her uniform and felt the weight of the silver star pinned above her left breast. Every inch of the metal glinted in the morning sun, a reminder of battles fought and lives saved, of courage earned in moments most men could never imagine. As she walked toward the main compound, a group of Navy SEAL recruits gathered near the barracks. Young, fit, and oozing confidence, they whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking toward her. Murmurs traveled down the line. "A medic? With a medal?" One muttered. "Wonder what she did. Patch some guy's arm." The laughter was quiet at first, but enough to sting. Sarah ignored them, walking with a measured stride, heels clicking against the gravel. She had faced worse. Ambushes in Helmand Province, insurgent fire raining down while she dragged the wounded through a minefield. She had saved lives when bullets screamed past her ears and comrades cried for help. A few ignorant young men in training would not intimidate her. She had a mission here, and it was far greater than their juvenile mockery. Captain Reynolds, a seasoned SEAL commander known for his unflinching demeanor, watched from the steps of the command center. He had heard the rumors. A female lieutenant, a decorated combat veteran, now training his recruits. Some of the men had dismissed her before even setting eyes on her. Reynolds' gaze followed Sarah as she approached, noting her composure, the subtle confidence in the way she carried herself, and the way the sunlight bounced off her metal. This wasn't someone who sought approval. She demanded none. Yet the medal told a story the men could not comprehend, one that would shake the arrogance from their bones, sooner or later. As Sarah reached the training field, the whispers of the recruits grew louder. Corporal Mason Briggs, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a permanent scowl etched across his face, stepped forward with a smirk. "What's the matter, Lieutenant?" he said, voice dripping with mockery. "Did they give you that shiny thing for knitting bandages?" Some of the men chuckled, while others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Sarah looked at Briggs for a moment, her eyes cold but steady, and then nodded politely. "I'll show you soon enough," she replied, her voice calm, measured. She did not raise her voice. She did not yell. She did not need to. Briggs laughed, not noticing the faint glint of steel in her stare. He turned back to the recruits and repeated, "Medal for patching people up? That's cute." The men snickered again. But not everyone laughed. A few younger recruits, still green and untested, watched silently, uncertainty mixing with curiosity. They had heard stories about the lieutenant who had earned a silver star, but her mere presence challenged what they believed about combat and valor. The day's schedule was brutal from the start. The recruits lined up for inspection, boots polished, uniforms crisp. Sarah walked the line, noting posture, readiness, and discipline. Her eyes were sharp, discerning every twitch, every hesitation did not escape her notice. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. The presence of a combat-hardened veteran alone carried weight. She was an authority figure, yes, but not in the conventional sense. This was someone who had seen war in its rawest form, someone who had stared death in the face and come back with scars both seen and unseen. Reynolds finally called the recruits together for a briefing. The field operation would begin in a few hours, a simulated combat scenario in the rugged woods nearby. The recruits would be tested on endurance, tactical maneuvers, and survival skills. The twist? Sarah would be leading one of the teams. A low murmur ran through the group as they realized it was not a fellow trainee, but a decorated lieutenant directing them. Some groaned audibly, their skepticism now tinged with anxiety. Briggs leaned closer to a friend, whispering, "How's she going to tell us what to do? She's a medic, for crying out loud. We're SEALs in training." His companion shrugged, shifting nervously. Sarah overheard, but she did not flinch. Instead, she mentally reviewed the terrain, weather forecasts, and known hazards. She thought about her team, the responsibilities she had, and the lives she could impact if they all survived. Her mind moved quickly, calculating every variable. She knew that earning respect was not a matter of words, it would be demonstrated in sweat, endurance, and leadership under pressure. By midday, the teams were ready. Sarah's group assembled at the drop point. She looked each member in the eye, including Briggs, and spoke with quiet authority. "We follow the plan. We watch each other's backs. We make it through together. No one gets left behind." The recruits exchanged glances. Some scoffed silently, but others, despite themselves, felt a stirring of confidence. There was something in her voice, a calm, unshakable certainty that made them want to follow, even against their initial doubts. As the helicopter blades roared overhead, kicking up dust and debris, Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the same she had felt during countless missions overseas. She secured her gear, checked her comms, and glanced at her team. "Stay sharp. Eyes open. Move fast," she said, and stepped into the wind as the rotors lifted them into the sky. The mock mission had begun, but Sarah knew the real test would not be the simulation. It would be earning the respect of those who thought courage could be measured by gender or rank. The recruits whispered again as the helicopter lifted. "She might actually be the real deal," one muttered. Briggs, however, stared at the floor, scowling, unwilling to admit even to himself that his assumptions were crumbling. As the camp receded below them, Sarah looked out over the dense forest and thought of the men she had saved, the chaos she had survived, and the lessons she had learned the hard way. She adjusted her helmet, tightened her straps, and steeled herself. This wasn't Afghanistan, but the principles remained the same. Stay calm, trust your instincts, protect your team, and never, ever underestimate the value of courage. For the first time, the recruits were about to see the woman behind the medal, and she intended to make every second count. The night had fallen over Camp Valor like a velvet curtain, and the barracks were dimly lit, with only the harsh glow of fluorescent bulbs cutting through the darkness. Inside, the recruits lounged on their bunks, some hunched over their gear, others sprawled on the floor, quietly plotting strategies for the grueling exercises ahead. Yet amid the usual camaraderie of a training camp, a quiet tension buzzed in the air. Sarah Coleman's presence was the topic of every whispered conversation, the silent elephant in the room. Corporal Mason Briggs, the loudest, most opinionated recruit in the room, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His eyes never left Sarah, who had quietly retired to a corner of the barracks, inspecting her equipment. He smirked, nudging Private Daniels beside him. "She's a medic, right?" Medal pinned on her chest. "Wonder if she's ever even pulled a trigger in anger," Briggs whispered, his voice just above a murmur, but loud enough for half the room to catch it. Laughter followed, low but deliberate, rolling through the bunks like ripples across water. A few recruits giggled, shaking their heads. "Yeah, must have patched some guy up for showing off, huh?" one said, earning a snicker from his bunkmate. Sarah heard every word. She didn't turn to face them, didn't snap a retort. She had spent years learning the value of patience under fire, and now patience was her weapon. She reminded herself of every moment in Helmand Province, when insurgents had struck her convoy, leaving her with nothing but a wounded team, limited supplies, and hours of gunfire. She had saved lives then, not by swaggering or bragging, but by remaining calm, calculating, and focused. She moved to her bunk, setting down her pack, unrolling her sleeping mat with deliberate efficiency. Every motion was measured, precise, the kind of efficiency that demanded observation. Briggs' smirk faltered slightly as he watched her. There was something about the calm in her demeanor that unsettled him. He had assumed mockery would suffice. It hadn't. Minutes later, the recruits gathered closer, forming a semicircle around a small pile of equipment and maps. The whispers subsided as their curiosity overtook their ridicule. Some had heard fragments of Sarah's record. She was decorated. Yes, but what did that mean in real terms? Heard she was a medic in Afghanistan, one muttered. But come on, a Silver Star? Must be one of those political awards. Sarah, overhearing just enough, kept her thoughts inward, letting the scene unfold. She allowed herself a faint smile, thinking, let them learn what courage really looks like. Captain Reynolds entered the barracks shortly after, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. The room instantly went silent, the recruits stiffening into near-military attention. Reynolds' eyes swept over them, noting the tension in the air. He paused on Sarah, then shifted his gaze to the murmuring group of young men. Quiet. Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, you face the forest. Survival, navigation, tactical drills. Everyone performs or fails. No excuses. His tone left no room for debate. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. For some, Reynolds' calm authority did little to hide their skepticism about following a female lieutenant. Briggs muttered under his breath, Yeah, let's see her lead us through this mess. But even he, seasoned in arrogance, felt a hint of hesitation. Sarah rose from her bunk and approached the map laid on the floor. She knelt, tracing her fingers across the terrain, silently plotting routes and hazards. Her mind moved with speed, calculating distances, angles, elevations, and water sources. She knew this was more than a training exercise. It was a test of leadership, resilience, and trust. And trust was not given, it was earned. As night deepened, she finally spoke. I've reviewed the terrain and weather conditions, she said softly, projecting her voice just enough for a few nearby recruits to hear. The forest isn't forgiving. There will be obstacles, simulated injuries, and challenges that require teamwork. I expect every member to follow instructions. Hesitation or disobedience can cost lives. Everyone accountable for everyone else. We succeed or fail as a team. Her words cut through the lingering whispers. The recruits looked at her differently, now not with mockery, but with the first glimmer of cautious respect. Briggs shifted uncomfortably, unable to reconcile his assumptions with the quiet authority she exuded. Hours passed, and the recruits eventually retired to their bunks, the tension of the unknown settling in. Sleep was difficult. Dreams were filled with imagined forest fires, simulated gunfire, and fear of failure. Sarah lay on her mat, eyes open, reviewing strategies in her mind. She thought about her team in Afghanistan, about the men who had relied on her, and the decisions she had made in seconds that had saved lives. She knew the forest would test these recruits differently, but the principles remained the same. Morning came slowly, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold. The recruits assembled at the edge of the training forest, their faces a mixture of fatigue, anticipation, and lingering doubt. Sarah stood at the front, adjusting her gear, her eyes scanning the line of young men she would lead. Briggs' smirk was gone, replaced by a rigid, almost defensive posture. Reynolds stepped beside her, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of her command. The helicopter blades whirred in the distance, ready to lift them into the first stage of the exercise. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the anticipation that preceded action. This was the moment she had prepared for, to turn whispers into respect, mockery into admiration, and uncertainty into unity. As the helicopter drew closer, Sarah turned to her team, her gaze firm, her tone calm but resolute. Follow my lead. Watch my back. Watch each other's back. No excuses. No hesitation. Move fast, stay alert, and trust the plan. The recruits, including Briggs, nodded, some reluctantly, some with the first spark of genuine attention. They had not yet seen what she could do under pressure, but something about her presence demanded acknowledgement. They were about to discover that courage, experience, and leadership could not be mocked away. The helicopter touched down, and the team climbed aboard, boots clanging against metal steps. Sarah secured her harness, checking the straps twice, then glanced at the forest below. Dense, untamed, and filled with unknown challenges, it awaited them. Her inner voice reminded her, this is where respect is earned, not with words, but with action. As the rotors lifted the team into the sky, the recruits' eyes widened at the approaching terrain. For some, the mockery of last night seemed absurd in the face of the coming reality. Sarah allowed herself a small, confident smile, thinking, let them see. Let them remember. Courage is never loud, it is quiet, deliberate, and unyielding. The forest sprawled below them, a green abyss filled with unseen dangers and hidden tests. The mission had begun, and with it, the first opportunity to turn whispers into lessons, doubts into respect, and mockery into understanding. Sarah Coleman's presence alone was a challenge, but her actions would define everything. The first rays of dawn filtered through the dense forest canopy, casting dappled patterns on the uneven forest floor. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman led her squad from the drop point, her boots crunching against gravelly soil and fallen pine needles. The young SEAL recruits followed hesitantly behind her, packs weighted with gear that seemed to grow heavier with every step. Their faces were streaked with exhaustion, yet the tension was more than physical. It was rooted in doubt, fear, and lingering disbelief that a woman, a medic no less, commanded them. Corporal Mason Briggs was at the front of the group, chest puffed, jaw tight. He glanced at Sarah every few steps, testing her silently, as though expecting any moment for her authority to crumble. "Lead the way, Lieutenant," he muttered sarcastically. "Show us how a medic handles the wild." A ripple of suppressed laughter passed through the group. Sarah ignored him, her gaze scanning the dense underbrush, noting fallen logs, streams, and subtle signs of wildlife that could conceal hazards or obstacles. Every decision she made now would influence their survival, and more importantly, begin to shape their perception of her. She moved with a calm, deliberate rhythm, adjusting pace when necessary, signaling changes in direction with precise hand gestures, ensuring everyone could see. "Form a line. Keep 20 paces between you. Eyes forward," she instructed, voice steady and commanding. The recruits complied, though some hesitated. Sarah didn't rush them. She had learned in Afghanistan that panic was contagious and hesitation could be fatal. "Trust the process. Trust each other. Trust me," she said, almost under her breath, more for herself than them. Hours passed in relative silence, broken only by the occasional crack of a branch or the murmur of a stream. Then the first obstacle presented itself, a narrow ravine filled with rushing water, deceptively deep and swift. The team paused at the edge, unsure of footing. Briggs scowled, muttering complaints under his breath, clearly frustrated that the medic had brought them into such a precarious position. Sarah knelt at the edge, inspecting the water and calculating the best path. "We cross one at a time. Brace against the current. Keep eyes on me," she instructed. With deliberate precision, she crossed first, gripping the roots of a nearby tree and offering her hand to each recruit in turn. The mockery that had filled the barracks moments ago began to fade with every careful, calculated motion. The recruits hesitated at first, but followed her example, some mumbling apologies under their breath as their boots splashed into the rushing stream. Once across, the team moved deeper into the forest, where the terrain became rugged and unrelenting. Fallen trees blocked their path, and thick undergrowth snagged at their boots and equipment. The sun was high, and sweat-streaked faces and stained uniforms. For some recruits, the physical challenge was compounded by the mental strain. Each step forced them to question their earlier assumptions about Sarah's capabilities. Then came the first tactical simulation. Using smoke grenades and blank fire rounds, Reynolds' team simulated an ambush, forcing the recruits to react quickly. Briggs froze for a moment, his instincts telling him to run, yet Sarah barked orders with authority and calm. Cover left flank. Suppress fire on the ridge. Daniels, take point. Her voice cut through chaos, precise and unwavering. The recruits scrambled, fumbling at first, but gradually falling into formation under her guidance. Sarah moved among them, correcting posture, signaling directions, and even dragging one of the younger, panicked recruits out of a fall hazard. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, each decision reducing the chaos around her. By the end of the simulation, the squad had successfully secured the area, though not without challenges. Briggs, drenched in sweat and mud, stood staring at Sarah, a mix of astonishment and begrudging respect in his eyes. How did you?" he muttered. Sarah only nodded silently, turning her attention to ensuring every recruit accounted for their equipment and condition. The day wasn't done. Next came the simulated casualty scenario. Reynolds had planted one of the recruits as a wounded soldier under a tree, completely immobilized. The rest of the team was tasked with locating and evacuating him while under continuous simulated fire. Briggs immediately panicked, shouting and hesitating. Sarah didn't hesitate. She moved through the team like a conductor, directing them with calm authority. Secure perimeter. Suppress fire. Move him out carefully. When she reached the wounded recruit, she performed a simulated triage, explaining each step to the team: airway management, rapid assessment, improvised splints. The recruits watched, some in disbelief. They had mocked her, but now they saw a level of competence and courage that could not be argued against. Every order she gave was precise, every action efficient. Briggs bit back a scoff, the reality settling in. She knew what she was doing. By late afternoon, the team had navigated several miles of treacherous terrain, crossed streams, scaled embankments, and successfully completed multiple tactical simulations. Exhaustion was evident, boots soaked, muscles screaming, energy waning, but the mental transformation was even more significant. Where whispers of mockery had once filled the air, there was now cautious acknowledgement, glances of respect exchanged silently among the recruits. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Sarah gathered her team in a small clearing. She didn't give a speech, didn't demand acknowledgement. Instead, she simply checked every man's condition, ensured hydration, and distributed instructions for the night simulation. The squad listened intently, hanging on her every word, each recruit realizing that the woman before them was not only capable, but decisive, courageous, and unwavering. Briggs lingered slightly behind, his pride warring with his newfound recognition of her authority. "Lieutenant," he said reluctantly, we followed your lead back there. You made the difference." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She simply gave a nod and focused on the map, already planning the next phase of the exercise. The respect was earned silently in the shared struggle of sweat, mud, and exhaustion. As night fell, the team set up a temporary perimeter, preparing for a simulated night attack. Sarah moved among them quietly, checking positions, offering corrections, and silently observing the transformation in their demeanor. The recruits who had whispered, mocked, and doubted were now alert, disciplined, and attentive. Briggs, especially, seemed smaller in stature, not physically, but in ego, humbled by the undeniable display of expertise and courage. As Sarah lay back for a brief rest, Staring up at the sky through the trees, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. This was not Afghanistan. There were no live bullets, no real casualties, but the lessons remained the same. Leadership was earned through action. Courage was proven in pressure. And respect was not demanded. It was demonstrated, step by step, decision by decision. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, heavier exercises, more complex simulations, but the seed had been planted. Mockery and doubt had begun to crack under the weight of competence and calm authority. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The recruits were learning, and so, in a way, was she. The forest whispered around them as darkness descended, the wind rustling through the trees like a silent audience. Every step, every decision, every command of Sarah Coleman had left a mark. And while the recruits might not admit it aloud yet, they were beginning to understand. Courage could not be faked. Leadership could not be simulated. And a silver star carried a story far greater than any mocking words. The sky had darkened with unnatural speed, clouds rolling across the horizon like a wall of steel. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman scanned the edge of the forest, feeling the first heavy drops of rain splash against her face. The wind howled through the trees, bending the branches and scattering loose debris. The recruits, exhausted from the day's grueling exercises, froze as thunder rumbled in the distance. Even in simulation, the forest now felt dangerously real. Everyone tightened formation. Eyes forward, stay close. Sarah shouted over the wind, her voice firm but controlled. The team scrambled, boots sinking into the muddy ground, packs heavy with soaked gear. Corporal Mason Briggs muttered under his breath, complaining about the weather and the ridiculous medic who thinks she can lead. But when lightning struck a nearby tree, splitting it with a deafening crack, even his bravado faltered. A young recruit, Private Jenkins, tripped over exposed roots, nearly sliding into a muddy stream. Sarah sprinted to him, grabbing his arm and hauling him upright with precision and strength that belied her frame. "Focus, watch your footing," she commanded. Her tone carried both urgency and reassurance, a balance the recruits hadn't expected from someone they had mocked just hours before. The storm intensified. Rain poured in sheets, soaking uniforms and washing away the warmth of the day. Visibility dropped to a few feet, and the forest floor became a slippery obstacle course. Fallen branches, hidden roots, and rushing water turned each step into a hazard. For the first time, some recruits began to question their earlier disdain. Leadership, they realized, was more than barking orders. It was about action, calm, and decisiveness in the face of chaos. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed nearby. Lightning had struck a tree directly on the edge of their path, sending shards of wood tumbling dangerously close. Briggs froze, fear etched across his face. "Move, move now," Sarah commanded, sprinting forward and grabbing his arm before he could falter. She pulled him behind a low ridge, shielding him from the falling debris. The other recruits followed, their earlier mockery replaced with focused urgency. One by one, she led them through the hazard, calculating every movement, every step, every risk. Sweat and rain mixed with mud on their faces, dripping into eyes and mouths, but Sarah remained a beacon of calm. She offered precise instructions, while simultaneously keeping a mental tally of her team's position, condition, and readiness. Every recruit, from the youngest to Briggs, began to grasp the weight of her experience, the kind forged in real combat zones. Hours passed as the storm raged on. They encountered simulated casualties. A recruit pinned under a fallen branch, another injured by the sudden collapse of part of a forest canopy. Sarah moved swiftly, stabilizing them, improvising solutions with what little gear they carried. She demonstrated how to secure a casualty, perform rapid triage, and coordinate evacuation routes, all while navigating treacherous terrain. The recruits watched, some in awe, some silently ashamed that their previous ridicule now felt foolish. At one point, Briggs slipped near the stream and lost his balance, arms flailing. Sarah didn't hesitate. She dashed into the rushing water, grabbed him mid-fall, and pulled him to safety. His eyes widened, a mix of shock and grudging respect filling them. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah shook her head, signaling him to focus. Words weren't needed here. Actions spoke louder than any apology. The storm continued into night, the forest now a chaotic mix of darkness, rain, and wind. Sarah ordered the team to establish a temporary perimeter, using their limited equipment to secure a defensive position. Every recruit moved with urgency, but Sarah remained the central point of authority, calm, decisive, and commanding. She checked everyone's condition, reassured the anxious, and corrected mistakes without raising her voice. By midnight, exhaustion had overtaken most of the recruits. Their clothes were soaked, faces smeared with mud, and muscles screamed in protest. Yet none dared defy Sarah's orders. Even Briggs, silent and introspective, followed each instruction meticulously. Something had shifted in him. Mockery had been replaced by tentative respect. He now understood, viscerally, the level of courage and competence this lieutenant embodied. Amid the chaos, a real challenge emerged. One of the younger recruits, Private Morales, panicked during a simulated night attack, sprinting blindly into a thicket. Sarah, without hesitation, dashed after him, rain and mud slowing her pace, and caught him just as he stumbled toward a sharp incline. She grabbed his arm, steadied him, and delivered a brief, firm lecture. Focus, eyes forward. You stay with the team. Her voice cut through the storm, forcing immediate attention and compliance. The remaining recruits watched silently, absorbing the reality of her actions. Leadership was not theoretical. It was alive in every decision, every risk taken, and every life protected. In the storm's chaos, Sarah had become both shield and guide, a figure whose presence alone demanded attention and respect. Finally, after hours of relentless conditions, the storm began to abate. The rain lessened to a drizzle, and the wind softened to a gust. The team, battered and soaked, gathered in a clearing, shivering but alive. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of what they had survived together. Not a word was spoken at first. The recruits, especially Briggs, were processing the sheer intensity of the day and the undeniable authority of the woman who had led them through it. Briggs finally muttered, almost under his breath, "Lieutenant, I didn't think?" He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Sarah gave him a steady, quiet look and simply nodded, offering no words of reassurance. Her actions had already spoken volumes. Sarah walked among the recruits, checking each one, offering brief guidance, adjusting packs, and making sure they were accounted for. The storm had stripped away their bravado, leaving only the raw reality of survival, endurance, and teamwork. Every misstep, every hesitation, had been met with her calm authority, and every life had been protected through decisive action. As they set up a secure perimeter for the night, the recruits finally understood courage and leadership could not be faked. The lieutenant they had mocked hours earlier was a veteran who had faced real death, chaos, and uncertainty. Her calm in the storm had demonstrated the difference between ego and experience, mockery and respect. Lying in their makeshift shelters that night, the recruits were silent, each reflecting on the day's events. Briggs stared into the darkness, a mixture of awe and guilt on his face. He had challenged her authority, underestimated her, and yet she had saved him not just from the simulated dangers of the exercise, but from his own arrogance. Sarah lay back on her mat, soaked and exhausted herself, feeling a quiet satisfaction. This was what leadership felt like: guiding, protecting, and commanding respect, not through intimidation, but through courage and competence. She allowed herself a small, reflective smile. The recruits had begun to see, understand, and respect the depth of her experience, and the real challenges of life, whether simulated or real, had already begun to reshape them. As the forest settled into a quiet, rainy night, Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the men she had saved in combat, the lessons she had learned, and the battles yet to come. She knew tomorrow would test them further, pushing limits, challenging assumptions, and revealing weaknesses. But tonight, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. The mockery had ended. Respect had begun. The storm had passed, but the lesson remained. Courage, leadership, and honor were not claimed, they were earned, in silence, in action, and in moments of undeniable truth. And Sarah Coleman had just proven that she embodied all three in ways no words could ever fully capture. The storm had finally passed, leaving the forest damp, misty, and eerily quiet. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman gathered her team in a small clearing near a creek, the morning sun barely breaking through the canopy. The recruits were exhausted from the previous night, faces streaked with mud and rain, eyes heavy but alert. A palpable tension hung in the air, a mixture of awe and lingering doubt. No one spoke for a long moment. None dared to break the silence that had fallen since the storm. Captain Reynolds approached quietly, his boots muffled against the soft ground. His gaze swept over the recruits, lingering on Briggs, whose prideful stance had softened into tentative respect. Reynolds then turned to Sarah. "Coleman, the recruits are ready to hear the story behind your medal," he said, his voice low but commanding. Sarah hesitated. Sharing the truth would strip away any illusions, any misconceptions about her abilities. It would confront them with the reality of combat, of courage under fire, and of the kind of decisions that most would never face. But she knew it was time. The silver star they had mocked was not a symbol of luck, politics, or fixing boo-boos. It was a testament to survival, leadership, and extraordinary valor under conditions that tested every limit of human endurance. She motioned for the recruits to sit, forming a semicircle around her. Their expressions were a mixture of anticipation and unease. Briggs shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath, "Let's hear it then." "Bet it's nothing." Sarah's voice was calm but steady, carrying the weight of memory. "I was deployed in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. My unit was ambushed during a routine patrol. Insurgents attacked from multiple directions, small arms fire, mortar, and IEDs. We were pinned down. Several men were wounded, and our medic had been incapacitated. I had no choice. I moved into the kill zone to retrieve the injured." She paused, allowing the recruits to absorb the gravity of her words. Some shifted uneasily. Others looked down at the ground, imagining the chaos she described. The forest around them was peaceful, but her story painted a picture of fire, blood, and danger. "I dragged 4 soldiers, one by one, into relative cover. Bullets were striking dangerously close. I performed emergency field surgery on each of them, stabilizing their conditions until evacuation could arrive. For 6 hours, under continuous fire, I treated, carried, and coordinated the wounded. At no point did I think about my own safety. My focus was on them, my team, my unit. That is why I earned the Silver Star." Silence fell over the group, heavier than any words of ridicule could have been. The recruits stared at her, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. This was not a story of a poster hero or a medic playing safe. It was the raw, unfiltered reality of battlefield heroism. Briggs' jaw tightened, his face pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling to find words. The laughter and mocking whispers of days before seemed absurd now. He had underestimated her, assumed incompetence based on gender and role, and now faced the undeniable truth of her valor. Private Daniels finally spoke, voice hushed. I didn't know." He trailed off, realizing words could not capture the courage required to act under such circumstances. Sarah nodded quietly. "It's not about medals. It's about responsibility, about choosing action over hesitation when lives are on the line. That day, I acted because it was necessary. I saved men I had trained with, who depended on me, who trusted me. That trust is not given lightly. It's earned in moments that test everything you are." The recruits absorbed her story, each interpreting it in their own way. Some felt awe, some guilt, some an awakening respect they had never felt before. Briggs remained silent, his earlier bravado shattered. He avoided her gaze, chewing at the inside of his cheek, wrestling with the weight of his prior arrogance. Captain Reynolds, standing a few steps back, nodded subtly at Sarah. The story was not just a recounting of past heroism. It was a lesson. The recruits needed to understand that valor, leadership, and courage could not be mocked or diminished. They could only be witnessed, experienced, and respected. Sarah continued, softer now, almost reflective. "I didn't earn that medal for recognition. I earned it because, at that moment, doing nothing wasn't an option. Every decision, every risk, every action counted. And every life I saved reminded me that leadership is about more than rank. It's about the people depending on you. And the courage to act when it matters most." The forest remained silent, the quiet magnifying the gravity of her words. Even Briggs could not deny the weight of her experience. His mind replayed the storm from the night before, the danger, the chaos, and the calm authority Sarah had shown. Mockery felt distant, irrelevant, a childish distraction in the face of such undeniable competence. Private Morales, who had panicked in the storm, spoke softly. I get it now. I see why you lead. I see why we followed." Others nodded, the understanding passing silently among them. They had witnessed her skill, courage, and decisiveness firsthand, but now they understood the story that shaped those qualities. Sarah allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was not pride, it was satisfaction. The respect that had been withheld, mocked, and questioned was finally being acknowledged, silently but firmly. She had earned it not through words, but through action, experience, and the undeniable truth of her past. Briggs finally lifted his eyes to meet hers. "Lieutenant, I misjudged you," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. I didn't know." Sarah nodded once, acknowledging the admission, but she said nothing further. The lesson had been absorbed. Words were unnecessary. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of all. "Let this be a reminder," he said, voice steady and firm, "that courage and leadership cannot be mocked. You've seen it in action, and you've heard it in truth. Lieutenant Coleman has earned every ounce of respect due to her, and you will not forget it." The recruits absorbed the weight of his words, understanding that respect was not a matter of convenience, popularity, or assumption. It was earned through action, courage, and truth. The forest, misty and serene, became a silent witness to the transformation occurring among them. Sarah stood quietly, letting the moment settle over the team. The storm had tested their bodies. Her story had tested their minds and hearts. The combination left them humbled, reflective, and attentive. They had mocked her medal hours ago, but now the truth had silenced doubt. The silver star was no longer an object of derision. It was a symbol of courage, experience, and unwavering commitment. By the time the morning sun fully broke through the trees, the team was walking in unison, their steps lighter, yet purposeful. The previous night's exhaustion remained, but their perception had shifted. Briggs, no longer mocking, moved at her side, quietly observing, absorbing, and learning. The rest of the recruits mirrored this transformation, attentive, disciplined, and ready to follow a leader who had proven herself not just in training, but in the crucible of real combat. Sarah glanced over her shoulder at the team, sensing the change. She did not need acknowledgement or applause. This was not about ego. It was about understanding, about trust, and about preparing them to meet the challenges ahead with the knowledge that courage was not theoretical. It was lived, tested, and endured. The forest around them seemed almost serene now, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. Yet Sarah knew the trials were far from over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, further tests of skill, endurance, and character. But for now, she allowed herself a quiet satisfaction. The story had been told, the lesson absorbed, and respect had begun to replace doubt. Briggs fell silent as they moved deeper into the forest, following Sarah's lead without hesitation. The other recruits mirrored his transformation, each step reinforcing the truth they could no longer deny. Courage, action, and leadership were not mocked. They were witnessed, respected, and remembered. And in that moment, Sarah Coleman knew that the first true victory had been achieved not in the simulation, not in the drills, but in the quiet acknowledgement of those who had once doubted her. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine as the recruits assembled in formation on the open field of Camp Valor. The previous days of grueling exercises and relentless training had left them physically exhausted, yet mentally sharper and more attuned to the challenges ahead. A different kind of tension hovered in the air now, not the whispering skepticism of mockery, but the charged anticipation of understanding, of witnessing respect being formally acknowledged. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman stood at the edge of the formation, her uniform damp from the morning mist, hair pulled back tightly, eyes scanning her team. For hours she had led drills, reviewed maneuvers, and ensured that every recruit was accounted for, every action precise. The team's discipline had improved exponentially, but there remained a quiet need for validation, not from her, but from someone of higher authority. Captain Reynolds emerged from the command tent, boots echoing sharply against the field's gravel perimeter. His presence immediately drew the attention of every recruit, the authority in his stance unmistakable. The murmurs of curiosity began to ripple through the line. Today was no ordinary day. Something significant was about to occur. Briggs shifted uncomfortably, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. Though he no longer mocked Sarah, he wasn't yet prepared for what he sensed was coming. Reynolds approached the formation, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze sweeping the recruits with deliberate calm. "Recruits," he began, voice carrying across the field, resonant and commanding. "Over the past days, many of you have tested limits physically, mentally, and morally. You've faced obstacles meant to challenge your endurance, your judgment, and your capacity for teamwork. Some of you doubted leadership, others questioned experience. That ends today?" He paused, letting the words sink in. A few recruits glanced at each other nervously. Some faces flushed with memory of mocking Sarah's silver star, the disrespect that had passed unnoticed by a few, but not unremembered by all. Reynolds stepped closer to Sarah, halting just behind her, and gestured with a subtle nod. "Lieutenant Coleman," he continued, "has demonstrated what true courage, leadership, and valor look like. Her actions in combat, and here during training, have set an example you ignore at your own peril." The words struck the recruits like a cold wind. Briggs' chest tightened. He felt heat rise to his face, a combination of shame, admiration, and disbelief. He had watched her lead through the storm, orchestrate tactical maneuvers with precision, and save team members during simulated casualties. But hearing Reynolds explicitly acknowledge, Her achievements in front of everyone crystallized the reality. Mockery was no longer an option. Reynolds lifted his hand slowly, commanding silence and attention. Courage isn't defined by age, gender, or rank. It is defined by action under fire, by decisions made when hesitation can cost lives, by the ability to lead when others falter. Lieutenant Coleman has earned not only the respect of her superiors, but the trust of every life she touches. Sarah remained still, eyes forward, letting the moment unfold. She did not seek validation. She had already earned it through action. But the formal acknowledgement by Reynolds reinforced the lesson for the recruits. Respect was not simply given, it was observed, internalized, and finally recognized aloud. Reynolds then performed an action that stunned the recruits. He removed his cap, holding it to his chest, and rendered a precise military salute to Sarah. The gesture, solemn and unyielding, was more than symbolic. It was a recognition of valor and authority in the purest sense. For a moment, the entire field was silent, the wind carrying only the faint rustle of leaves. Slowly, one by one, the recruits began to mirror the salute. Some were hesitant, glancing at peers for confirmation, but eventually, every man in formation raised a hand in quiet acknowledgement. Briggs was among the last, his movements stiff, deliberate, but authentic. The weight of pride, doubt, and mockery had been stripped away, leaving only respect. "Let this moment serve as a lesson," Reynolds said, lowering his cap and returning to Sarah's side. "Mockery and doubt have no place in this unit. Leadership and courage are demonstrated through actions and decisions. The medal you questioned yesterday represents something far greater than recognition. It represents lives saved, decisions made under extreme pressure, an unwavering commitment to duty. Lieutenant Coleman embodies all of that." Briggs clenched his fists, struggling with a surge of emotion he hadn't anticipated. I misjudged you," he whispered to himself, voice barely audible. Sarah's gaze met his, calm and unwavering. She nodded once, subtle, acknowledging the admission without a word. That was all Briggs needed. The acknowledgement was unspoken but powerful. He had seen, understood, and now respected her. The rest of the recruits mirrored his realization. The field, once charged with whispering skepticism, was now quiet, disciplined, and attentive. They were no longer just following Sarah's orders. They were witnessing the embodiment of what they were being trained to become: disciplined, capable, and respectful under the weight of true authority. Reynolds continued, addressing the recruits with unwavering intensity. "You will take this lesson with you into every mission, every exercise, and every challenge. Valor is not assumed, mocked, or speculated upon. It is earned, demonstrated, and remembered. Lieutenant Coleman has done all three." Sarah finally allowed herself a small, composed smile. Her eyes swept across the formation of recruits, noting their transformation. Some heads were bowed in reflection, others raised, acknowledging the truth of her actions. For the first time in the training exercises, the invisible wall of doubt had been completely dismantled. Briggs, standing at attention, felt a shift within himself. He had spent days testing, mocking, and dismissing Sarah, yet here he was, silent, humbled, and aware of his misjudgment. The experience had forced him to confront arrogance, assumptions, and the true nature of leadership. Respect, he realized, could not be demanded. It could only be earned, witnessed, and internalized. The field exercises resumed after the acknowledgement, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Commands were followed without hesitation, movements were precise, and communication was sharp. The team, once fractured by doubt and mockery, was now cohesive. Sarah led with the same calm authority as before, but now every instruction carried the weight of demonstrated respect. By the end of the day, the recruits had not only survived rigorous training exercises, but had internalized a vital lesson. Leadership, courage, and valor were realities beyond mockery. The acknowledgement by Reynolds had reinforced what Sarah's actions had already demonstrated. True authority is earned in action, validated in experience, and respected when witnessed. As the recruits returned to their barracks that evening, the silence among them was reflective rather than mocking. Briggs walked beside his teammates, head low, absorbing the lesson, understanding that true leadership required courage, humility, and unwavering commitment. Sarah, observing quietly from the rear, allowed herself a brief sense of satisfaction. The formal acknowledgement by Reynolds had cemented the transformation she had begun. The mockery and doubt that greeted her arrival were replaced with recognition, respect, and a newfound understanding of what it meant to lead under pressure. The forest and fields around Camp Valor stood silent witness to this transformation. Leadership, Sarah knew, was not measured by medals, rank, or initial impressions. It was proven, observed, and remembered. And today, both the recruits and Briggs had learned that lesson in the most undeniable of ways. The morning sun broke over Camp Valor, casting long streaks of light across the field. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman stood at the edge of the training grounds, surveying her squad. Gone were the whispers of doubt, the skeptical glances, and the mocking smirks that had plagued her since their arrival. The recruits now moved with precision, their posture disciplined, eyes alert, and faces marked by determination. Corporal Mason Briggs was at the front of the formation, not because of ego, but because he had earned his place. The arrogance that had once fueled him was replaced with cautious attentiveness. He watched Sarah carefully, ready to follow her lead, yet aware that the moment for heroics was no longer about personal pride, it was about the team. Reynolds stepped forward, his voice cutting sharply across the field. Today marks the final phase of your training. You will face simulated combat scenarios, navigation exercises, and team survival tests. This is where coordination, discipline, and trust are non-negotiable. Lieutenant Coleman will lead you. Failure to operate as a cohesive unit will result in consequences you will not forget. Sarah's eyes scanned her team. They were ready, not perfect, but ready. Their previous failures, hesitation, and mockery had been replaced with focus, respect, and trust. She knew the final exercises would push them to the limits of endurance, testing their skills, judgment, and the bonds they had begun to forge. The first exercise was a simulated hostage rescue in a dense forest sector. Reynolds had set up multiple hostages and designated capture points, creating a complex challenge. Sarah quickly briefed the team, assigning roles based on skills she had observed over the past days. Each recruit, now attentive and disciplined, accepted their role without hesitation. Briggs, you take the left flank, she instructed, voice steady and authoritative. Daniels and Morales, cover the rear. Jenkins, you're with me on point. Eyes sharp. Trust your team and move as one. The team advanced into the forest, moving silently, each step deliberate. Gone was the clumsy hesitation of their earlier exercises. Sarah led with calculated precision, signaling when to advance, pause, or adjust formation. Every recruit responded seamlessly, following cues they had learned not only to recognize, but to anticipate. The simulated engagement began. Smoke grenades erupted, alarms blared, and blank fire rounds simulated the chaos of a hostile encounter. Recruits ducked, dove, and maneuvered as one unit, executing cover fire, suppression, and rescue operations with coordination that would have impressed even seasoned veterans. Briggs, moving on the left flank, protected a fellow recruit under simulated fire. The tension of the situation forced him to rely on Sarah's guidance without questioning her decisions. He realized, as he had during the storm, that true leadership demanded trust and decisiveness. Hesitation could cost lives even in training. Sarah reached the location of the first simulated hostage. She crouched, signaling for cover while assessing the perimeter. Within moments, she had directed the extraction, coordinated suppressive fire, and ensured that the hostage was moved safely to the designated extraction point. The team followed her commands flawlessly. Each move reflected lessons learned from the storm, the treacherous terrain, and the trust they had built under pressure. As they completed the rescue, Reynolds observed from a distance, nodding in approval. Sarah turned to her team, her gaze sweeping each recruit. "Well executed," she said. "No hesitation. You worked as a unit. Remember this cohesion. It's your strongest asset. Trust each other, trust your training, and trust your leadership." The team pressed on into the next exercise, a night navigation and survival challenge. They were tasked with traversing rugged terrain, avoiding simulated enemy observation points, and establishing a secure campsite. The night air was cold, and fatigue threatened to sap their energy, yet every recruit moved with quiet determination. Briggs, leading a small contingent, communicated effectively, issuing commands and corrections as Sarah had taught him. The mocking, arrogant soldier had transformed into a capable leader in his own right, reflecting the example Sarah had set. He had learned that leadership was not about ego. It was about precision, courage, and the ability to inspire others. The team encountered obstacles, sudden drops, water crossings, and uneven terrain. Each challenge required coordination and trust. Sarah guided them through every hazard, offering corrections, reassurance, and encouragement. The recruits executed her instructions flawlessly, navigating the treacherous paths with confidence born from experience. Midway through the exercise, a simulated casualty scenario forced the team to make quick decisions under stress. Jenkins, acting as the injured recruit, called out in mock distress. Sarah immediately assessed the situation, delegating roles and directing the team to provide rapid aid while maintaining perimeter security. The recruits worked together seamlessly, applying first aid techniques, securing the area, and improvising solutions under her guidance. By the time they reached the designated campsite, night had fully descended. The recruits, though exhausted, moved with purpose, setting up a secure perimeter and preparing defensive positions. Sarah oversaw the process, ensuring every detail was accounted for. The transformation from the first day of mockery and hesitation was complete. This was now a cohesive, disciplined team capable of handling high-pressure situations with precision. Reynolds approached again, his expression one of satisfaction. "This is the standard I expect from every member of this unit," he said. "Not because of medals, rank, or hierarchy, but because of the discipline, courage, and trust you have demonstrated. Lieutenant Coleman has led you through every challenge, and you have all risen to meet her standard." Briggs, exhausted but alert, felt a profound shift. He looked at Sarah, no longer as someone to be tested or mocked, but as a leader whose experience and courage had earned unshakable respect. "I get it now," he muttered under his breath, voice low. "I understand what it means to follow someone like her." The team gathered around Sarah one final time for debriefing. Each recruit, though physically drained, carried a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah spoke calmly, reinforcing the lessons of the day. Trust, cohesion, and courage were the pillars of survival, both in training and in combat. "Today, you demonstrated what teamwork truly means," she said. "You moved as one. You acted decisively. You protected each other. That is how you survive. That is how you win." The recruits nodded, understanding now the depth of the lessons imparted. They had faced chaos, fear, and doubt, and emerged not only physically capable, but mentally transformed. Briggs, once the loudest skeptic, now stood quietly beside his team, absorbing the significance of their collective achievement. As the night fell over Camp Valor, the team settled into their tents, reflecting on the day's events. Sarah walked among them quietly, checking their gear, offering brief words of encouragement, and ensuring everyone was accounted for. The respect, trust, and cohesion she had earned were evident in every glance, every movement, and every unspoken acknowledgement. The transformation was complete. Mockery and doubt had been replaced by admiration and understanding. The recruits were no longer just followers. They were a unified team, capable of facing challenges together under the guidance of a leader who had proven herself through action, courage, and experience. As Sarah finally rested, looking out into the forest beyond the camp, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. The silver star she wore was no longer a subject of ridicule. It was a symbol of the lessons she had imparted, the respect she had earned, and the transformation she had inspired. The team had been tested, pushed to their limits, and emerged stronger, wiser, and unified. And in that moment, Lieutenant Sarah Coleman understood something profound. Leadership was not about being followed. It was about inspiring trust, courage, and excellence in others, even in the face of mockery, doubt, and impossible odds. The morning sun rose over Camp Fowler, painting the sky in streaks of amber and gold. The forest glistened with dew, the remnants of the storm and training exercises still lingering in the air. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman stood at attention near the training grounds, her uniform crisp despite the grueling days past. Around her, the recruits were assembling for the final inspection, the culmination of their transformative journey. The atmosphere was electric, not with tension or doubt, but with anticipation, pride, and quiet respect. Each recruit carried the marks of their training: mud-streaked boots, scrapes, and sweat-stained uniforms. But the changes within them were far deeper than physical. They had faced fear, chaos, and mockery, and emerged disciplined, cohesive, and respectful of the leadership that had guided them. Corporal Mason Briggs walked to his position in formation with a quiet confidence. He had shed the arrogance and doubt that had once defined him. His eyes now held acknowledgement and admiration for the lieutenant who had led him, tested him, and ultimately earned his respect. The silver star she wore was no longer an object of ridicule, but a symbol of courage, leadership, and integrity, one he had learned to truly honor. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, the authority in his stance commanding immediate attention. He scanned the formation, his gaze settling on each recruit with the weight of experience. "Recruits," he began, voice strong and resonant, "you have endured every test, every obstacle, and every challenge set before you. You have faced chaos, fatigue, and fear, and you have emerged as a disciplined, capable team. Today, you graduate not only from training, but into the embodiment of what it means to serve with courage and honor." The recruits shifted, eyes straight, hearts pounding with a mixture of pride and relief. They had earned this moment through sweat, perseverance, and trust, not only in themselves, but in the leadership that had guided them. Reynolds' attention turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant Coleman," he said, removing his cap and holding it to his chest in a solemn gesture, "has demonstrated extraordinary leadership, courage, and resilience. Her actions have set the standard for every one of you. She has earned the respect that only the most deserving can claim, and she has inspired that respect in you." Sarah's face remained calm, but a quiet satisfaction softened her features. She had not sought recognition, nor had she demanded it, but this moment was a testament to what action, courage, and integrity could accomplish. She had led by example, and her team had absorbed the lesson. Briggs stepped forward slightly, eyes meeting Sarah's. His voice, low but steady, carried a weight that surprised even him. "Lieutenant, I misjudged you," he said. "I doubted your leadership, questioned your decisions, and mocked your accomplishments. But now I see. Everything you did was real. Every decision, every action. It saved lives. You earned our respect." Sarah gave a subtle nod, acknowledging the admission without the need for words. It was not the praise that mattered. It was the understanding, the transformation, and the lesson internalized. Briggs returned to formation, carrying a humility and determination that marked his growth as a soldier and as a person. The recruits moved forward into a series of final exercises designed to test coordination, leadership, and strategic thinking. Under Sarah's guidance, they executed complex maneuvers flawlessly, demonstrating not only technical proficiency, but also trust, cohesion, and respect. Every order was followed precisely, every action measured, and every decision coordinated. By mid-afternoon, the exercises were complete, and the team gathered in a clearing for final debriefing. Reynolds addressed them once more, his tone both proud and instructive. This is what excellence looks like. Not in medals, not in rank, not in personal pride, but in teamwork, discipline, courage, and trust. Lieutenant Coleman has shown you that true leadership is earned through action, and you have proven that you can rise to meet that standard. Sarah stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the recruits. You have all faced challenges that tested your bodies, minds, and courage. You have learned to trust, to act decisively, and to protect each other. These lessons do not end here. They will follow you into every mission, every operation, and every challenge you face as SEALs. Remember them, live them, and honor the trust placed in you. The recruits absorbed her words, some nodding, others simply standing in quiet reflection. Each understood the weight of what they had accomplished, and the role Sarah had played in their transformation. They had begun their training skeptical, doubtful, and mocking, yet now they were unified, disciplined, and deeply respectful. Briggs, standing tall beside his team, felt a surge of emotion. He had tested her patience, mocked her achievements, and doubted her every move. Yet through the trials, the storms, and the challenges, she had proven herself beyond question. The lessons she imparted were now embedded in his mind and heart, shaping the soldier he had become. Reynolds stepped forward one last time, addressing the recruits formally. You are now graduates of this phase of training. Carry with you the lessons learned, the discipline earned, and the respect for leadership demonstrated. Lieutenant Coleman has set an example that will guide you throughout your careers. Honor it, respect it, and emulate it in every action you take. The recruits stood at attention, the weight of accomplishment heavy but empowering. They had endured trials that tested every limit, faced the challenges of chaos and uncertainty, and emerged stronger and more capable than they had imagined. The transformation was complete. Sarah watched quietly as her team received their acknowledgement, the culmination of days of rigorous training and life lessons. The silver star she wore gleamed in the sunlight, not as a symbol of personal achievement alone, but as a testament to courage, leadership, and the respect she had earned, not demanded. Briggs finally exhaled, shoulders relaxing. He had learned the most important lesson of all. True leadership is not about ego or rank, but about courage, competence, and integrity. Sarah had taught him that lesson through every storm faced, every obstacle overcome, and every life protected. As the recruits filed past Sarah to receive their final commendations, they offered quiet words of gratitude, nods of respect, and brief gestures of acknowledgement. Each interaction reflected the journey they had undergone from skepticism and mockery to respect and understanding. The team was no longer fractured by doubt. It was unified by experience, trust, and admiration for the leader who had guided them. Finally, as the last recruit passed, Sarah stood alone for a moment, reflecting on the journey. She thought of the storms, the exercises, the moments of doubt and fear, and the transformations that had taken place. She realized that leadership was not merely about command, it was about inspiring others to find courage within themselves, to trust, and to rise above fear and uncertainty. The forest around Camp Valor was silent, bearing witness to the culmination of this journey. The storms had passed, The exercises were complete, and the lessons had been learned. Sarah Coleman, wearing her silver star with quiet pride, understood that the true victory was not in medals or recognition. It was in the growth, respect, and courage she had inspired in her team. As she turned to leave the field, the recruits called out in unison, a rare, sincere tribute to the leader who had earned every ounce of their respect. "Thank you, Lieutenant Coleman." She nodded, acknowledging them without words. The moment was complete. The journey had ended, but the lessons, the respect, and the courage would endure forever. And in that quiet, victorious moment, Sarah Coleman walked from the training grounds, her heart steady, her mind clear, and her legacy of leadership forever etched in the lives she had transformed.